Welcome to Forum 360 on Fusion, your PBS channel. Thank you for joining us on our global outlook with a local view. This is Leslie Ungar, your host today. In the 1890s, they were the bad guys when the term yellow journalism was coined to identify newspapers that presented little or no legitimate, well-researched news for the sole purpose to sell newspapers. In the 1970s, they became the good guys with the work of Woodward and Bernstein, the Washington Post, and Watergate. It seems like these days, they're often the bad guys, the victim, the subject of, or the vehicle for fake news. I'm talking about the challenges of 21st century media, print journalism, the traditional media, and in some ways, social media. Our guest today is Brian Tucker, former editor and publisher of Cleveland Crain's magazine, the Bible for businesses and professionals in Northeast Ohio. In his 28 years at Crain's, you could say he saw it all. To share with us his wisdom and observations, we welcome Brian Tucker. Thank you for joining us today.
It's nice to be here, Leslie.
I want to begin by asking you, how did you end up with a career in journalism?
It was sort of by accident, somewhat. In the broader scheme of things, I was one of those that got hooked on journalism after Watergate. I had started in college intending to be a high school history teacher and coach.
Oh.
And then I realized about halfway through that there wasn't going to be much of a market for that profession. So I started working at Lordstown, making cars.
I remember Lordstown.
And because that was how I was paying for college. And I had earlier worked at a couple of small newspapers as a sports writer, and then got laid off at Lordstown and went down to Florida to visit some friends. Ended up talking my way into an interview at the Tampa Times. They hired me as a sports writer, and I did that for about 4 or 5 months and got called back to Lordstown. So I came back and I changed my major to journalism.
Now, since we're on the eve of Game 3 of the finals, if you go back to your sports days, well, what are you projecting here?
Well, it would be probably easy to project that the Cavs might end up losing 4-1 again like last year. They are certainly outmanned. I mean, this is a Golden State team that is remarkably stacked with talent. But when you have LeBron James, you can never count a team out. And we saw that 2 years ago, and who knows?
Well,
but he does look very, very tired. And he played every game this year.
Yes.
And he's played all these minutes, so we'll have to see.
Well, we'll wait for another Cleveland miracle. How, in your years in journalism, how have you seen the role of journalism change in the last few decades, and in what ways has it changed?
Well, not very many for the better, I'm afraid to say. The biggest change in journalism has been the advent of the internet. And the sort of press to publish quick, to get it on the web quickly. I think you see it across the spectrum of media organizations that are either because their staff has been cut so much or because it's just expeditious. They are installing systems that really allow reporters to write to the web, if you will. I mean, sort of write the story, publish. And, you know, you're losing, not only is that why you're seeing a lot of mistakes in grammar and punctuation and some of the simple elemental things of journalism, but you're seeing factual mistakes. I mean, you know, when there's a reason that newspapers for all those decades had layers of editors and copy editors. They had people reading and checking and fact checking, and then when it finally went to press, it was, you know, pretty thoroughly vetted. You know, it's not done so thoroughly anymore, and that's dangerous.
And you're saying it's not done as thoroughly because it's a sacrifice for speed.
It's a sacrifice for speed and also for dollars. I mean, it's I'll probably have these numbers incorrect, but when I came back, when I left the Associated Press and came here as editor of Crain's in March of '85, I want to say that the Plain Dealer had a newsroom staff, an editorial staff of somewhere between 400 and 500 people. I mean, it was a big, robust operation. I think that now, between Cleveland.com's newsroom and the Plain Dealer's newsroom, I'd guess it maybe 200, maybe. That's just a lot of people gone. And when you do that sort of cutting in a newsroom like that, you end up offering buyouts to people because they're the most likely to take it. Well, when you lose those senior people, you lose institutional memory, and you lose a lot of quality in the newsroom that I think is missing now, and that's true everywhere.
Now, you mentioned Cleveland Crain, so let's go there for a moment. Cleveland Crain writes about business, right? It's largely about the business landscape in Northeast Ohio. So do you learn about business by writing about it, or do you write about it and then learn about business?
A little bit of both. When I was recruited to be editor of Crain's Cleveland Business, I was assistant bureau chief in Los Angeles for the Associated Press. A former newspaper colleague of mine had left the Detroit Free Press to be startup editor at Crain's Detroit Business, Peter Brown, and who called me one day in LA and said, "The publisher in Cleveland is looking for an editor. Would you care to talk to them?" And so I did. I was from here, so it was sort of interesting. I flew back for an interview, and before I knew it, I was packing my bags and heading to Cleveland. So.
Now, you were editor and publisher at a time when, I mean, Cleveland Crain was really the big guy in town. I mean, it really was like the Bible, you know, for business. Have you observed, did readership reaction to journalism into Cleveland Crain, did it change since 1985? Did you see it change there the same way that we see it change outside of business?
Yeah, I think so. So when I came as editor, so I did the editor's job for about 3.5 years before I became publisher.
And for our audience,
publisher,
editor, publisher.
Yeah, you know, the joke is the editor spends the publisher's money, the publisher has to make money so the editor can spend it. It's a joke, but the publisher is in effect the CEO of the newspaper. So publisher oversees the editor, the ad sales director, the circulation manager, et cetera. So it's in effect the CEO job. I was publisher and editorial director, so I still wrote a column every week and got a little bit involved in the editorial product, but not so much. But when I was editor, this newspaper was not yet 5 years old. And I was coming from the world's largest and oldest news organization to this small little paper that was using typewriters to produce its paper. It was on newsprint, black and white photos. I wanted to ask where the Gutenberg press was. I mean, it was really sort of really a small step toward what it had become. Now, fortunately, the managing editor that I had when I got there had been a candidate for the editor's job, and he did not get it, so he was not really happy, and I could understand that. He went to the Plain Dealer. It gave me the chance to hire, which was terrific. So I hired a man named Mark Dodosh, who was with Dow Jones in New Jersey, had been a banking reporter for the Wall Street Journal, was from Cleveland, wanted to come back. So, you know, immediately the number one and number two in the newsroom were from big, robust news organizations, and we were accustomed to really being demanding of the editorial product. And we just step by step started making improvements. We started hiring. As people left, we hired more seasoned people, and we just got it better and better. We changed the paper stock. We changed to 4-color. We changed beats around. So we did things that our message was we wanted to make people business uncomfortable if they were going to lunch Monday and they hadn't seen their Crains yet. Because we wanted them to really want to know what we're.
So now think about that, and now kind of juxtapose that with social media, where now today people can get their message out on social media, wait to have it be covered by someone like Crain's or Plain Dealer or whatever. So if people can get their message out, so how do they still need traditional media?
Are you talking about the newsmakers? You're talking about that used to come to Crain's asking them to do a story on them?
Yeah, so that Crain's wanted to cover.
So I think that there is a substantial number of people, both consuming the news and making the news, that still feel like it's not really news unless it's printed on that newspaper. I mean, it's just, social media is social media.
I'm one of those.
Yeah, and if it can go viral and it can get a lot of tweets and retweets and likes and shares and all that stuff, I mean, that's terrific. But how often does it really happen? And the kind of story that happens with is usually the sensational kind of headline grabbing stuff that is not the nuts and bolts of what a business newspaper wants to do. Which takes me to your other question, which was about how people get into business journalism. When I took the job as editor, I wasn't a business journalist. I was coming from the Associated Press, where you're an ultimate generalist. But I had done enough business reporting in the various bureaus that I was in that I had some notion of what it is that we wanted to do. So it was really fun. It was 29 years of developments at Crain's.
Today we are talking to the former editor and publisher of Cleveland Crain's magazine, Brian Tucker. Stay with us because we're going to ask about that really dreaded 4-letter word, fake. Okay, so your role with the business magazine, your role was primarily the last 28, 29 years was with the business magazine, but use your expertise and your experience from Associated Press and from just being in the media and tell us from your perspective, what is, if there is a fake news, what is fake news?
Well, fake news is, at its core, has been with us for centuries. And it really is falsifying things so that they appear to be legitimate news, but they're done to make a point or to denigrate a candidate or to prove some issue. Fake news has been around for a very long time. It's just now the fact that it can be sent. I mean, we all see it on our Facebook feeds. You see it everywhere where there's a headline. It's with what looks to be. You might click on it, and it's got all the right graphics, and you may never see a news site, but look one, you get, and before you know it, someone's read one of those stories and shared it. The else shares it, and we know what happens then.
So, with your magic wand, okay, tell us the reader that that donates some of their time each day to whether they're going to read or whether they're reading in paper or both. How does a reader differentiate between real and fake news?
Well, the best way is to, if you see one of these, what appears to be a pretty outrageous story, is to go to Politico or go to the various websites, factchecker.org. I mean, there are a lot of websites dedicated to determining whether something is legitimate.
But here, I have to interrupt you and ask you. For the outlandish stories, yes, but isn't it more dangerous when quote, fake news is used for the everyday, when not the outlandish? When it's used for the everyday.
Oh, absolutely.
How much is the average reader going to spend to go look up, how many people were there really at the inaugural, right? Isn't it more dangerous for the everyday than it is for those outlandish?
It is horrifyingly dangerous.
And
because
keep down that
smart people, otherwise very smart, are doing this very thing that they are reading things. They are not delving into them. They they find that it fits their perceived notion, just share all their, and it's off and running, and that's how the damage is done.
Now you said preconceived notion, so I want to follow that. A couple years ago, I heard Aaron David Miller. That's right. I always forget if it's It's Aaron David Miller from Cleveland originally, that worked in the State Department for 20-some years, and he said that if you watch, say, Fox News, you also need to watch MSNBC, and if you watch MSNBC, you also need to watch. Meaning you need to get your information from a wider. But when you talk about preconceived notions and what fulfills our preconceived notions, I mean, is it realistic that people are going to get their news from a variety of different sources?
Well, I hope so. It's not normal for people to do that. It takes a little bit of effort. But most newspapers on their editorial sections often had both a liberal and a conservative voice, whether it's a syndicated columnist or a local columnist. It is important to read both sides, because you can't, if you're in one of these silos and you're just hearing the echo chamber, just hearing the things that you agree with, it goes nowhere. And we're not going to get anywhere in the country or in journalism if people are just reading what they already agree with.
Now, I just returned, as we were talking before we started taping, I just returned from Israel, and I took several hardback books with me. Actually, I found on the beach in Tel Aviv, they have these portable libraries, and you
like
can
the
leave a
little
book.
library, yeah.
It's like a little kiosk. You just leave a book or take a book. So I could leave the books that I read, but I took hardbacks with me, and the Sunday New York Times I hadn't read. But where do you see print media's future? I mean, are people going to continue with them, either online or the actual book? What do you see as a future of online media, or just print media?
Print media. I wish I could be more optimistic. I fear that we are headed. All you have to is look at an issue of the Daily Plain Dealer on one of the 4 days they publish and see how many ads there are, to know that, I mean, that's their revenue. And yes, they get revenue from digital advertising and all that, but the model is so broken. I mean, the digital advertising brings in pennies on the dollar to a newspaper. And it's the same thing with Crain's Cleveland Business. They both face the same challenges. So I fear for that product. I think what's going to happen is they're going to have to charge more and more for the printed copy. And by the way the nature of the business is, it's going to be thinner and thinner, and people then are going to make an economic decision, and fewer people are going to read it. I hope I don't see the end, but I don't know where this ends well for print media.
For print media. Well, let's look at media from a little bit more general. Why, it seems like media, period, is really a fair word, because it includes so much. It includes the blogger who has no training, just has a computer.
No editor.
No editor, no copywriter, no anything, as well as a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist. So it's an odd word to use to cover so much. But why is media today, as I said in the beginning, there have been times when media was kind of the whipping boy and times when media was a shining star. Why does media seem to get attacked so much today?
Well, because the people who don't like what's being reported have always been comfortable attacking the media. So this is not new that somebody like Donald Trump or anyone else attacks the media. I mean, I wish I had a nickel in my career for the number of people who said, "You misquoted me," when what they really were upset about was that I wrote down what they said and reported it.
It was just easier to say misquoted or taken out of context, right?
Exactly. So it's a good whipping boy. It really is.
My last serious question: what did our forefathers mean by the term free press, and why was it important enough to be even talked about by our forefathers?
Well, I believe it was free and uncensored. It was free of all government regulation. They had come from countries, England and others, where it was very common for the newspapers to be controlled by the monarchy. And I think that they knew, I mean, I think it was Jefferson that always said he would take a government with a free press before a strong government without a free press. It's an important, I mean, there's a reason it's called the Fourth Estate. It truly is the unofficial fourth branch of our government. And that's what is going to be perilously missing in our republic if the newspapers really stop being, because they're the watchdogs.
What is one thing that you would want people to know about the world of journalists that you think we don't?
That they're all not as liberal as people think and want to whitewash everybody with the same brush, and that the generally caring people who want to report on things to make a difference. There's an old adage about journalism is to afflict the comfortable and comfort the afflicted. That was sort of the muckrakers adage from that period in American history. And they really, I think journalists want to be fair, and they want to be right, and they want to make a difference.
Well, that's a nice thought. In the remaining time, I'm going to ask you for 1, 2, 3 word answers. Okay. Best memory in your 28 years at Crain's? Or one of the best memories?
Probably the first time that we had to go to our lawyers at Jones Day for a pre-publication review of a story.
And that's the best memory because?
Because that meant we were doing serious journalism that we wanted to be really careful about.
The person who surprised you the most when you met them in person? Is there a person, or does no one surprise you after 28 years?
Let's see. Well, that's a great question.
Great.
Publisher
and editor, a great question.
That's really a...
28 years, you've seen Cleveland, you've all around. Biggest Cleveland accomplishment?
Biggest Cleveland accomplishment has been the true renaissance of downtown Cleveland. I've seen bits and pieces of it in the early '80s, and it would sort of come and go. That first wave of investment in the baseball field and the basketball arena and all that stuff. That was a lot driven by public money. What we've seen pre the Republican National Convention and since, this investment by capitalists in downtown, it really speaks to an ongoing rebirth of downtown Cleveland. So I think that's the biggest thing.
What do you miss most now that you're a former publisher and editor?
Probably writing my column. I wrote a column each week, and my kids are always start blogging, and I'll do after I retire. But right now, I'm just trying to help Dollar Bank and do other kind of work.
The net toward the media will end when ... fill in the...
When pigs fly.
The role media will play in the next election is?
Truth teller.
And my last question. There will be print journalism as long as there is civilization.
Yes.
Oh, yes. All right. Yes, and when pigs fly and truth teller. It was easier when we were taught and when we actually believed that if it was in writing, it was true. Now, we often don't know what is true. Like all of us in any profession, 21st century media faces new challenges. We get our news in new and different ways. Anyone with a laptop can become a journalist in the world of social media. And can we all agree on what defines a fact? Our guest, Brian Tucker, former editor and publisher of Cleveland Crain's, tried to guide us through a world of fake versus real, traditional versus new, and fact versus, well, sometimes versus the rest of the world. This is Leslie Ungar. Thank you for joining us on Forum 360.
Forum 360 is brought to you by Electrical Impulse Communications, the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, Hudson Community Television, the Rubber City Radio Group, an anonymous donor, the Jewish Community Board of Akron, Medical Mutual of Ohio, Blue Green, and Forum 360 supporters.